with Archbishop John Wester, and it's an odd couple. And, I don't know, for some reason, Archbishop, yesterday I started thinking of us as Batman and Robin, something like that. But it's just been such a joy to develop a working relationship with the Archbishop and a close friendship. And the way it started, I knew that he was appearing at an event down at the Roundhouse. And something like 6-7 years ago, I should explain, I'm what I call a secular anti-nuclear weapons activist. But 6-7 years ago, I came to a rather obvious conclusion that we secular activists, we're getting creamed politically is what's happening. And I say that as one who would go to Congress 3-4 times a year pre-COVID, and I kind of know the ropes, but we're getting creamed. So therefore, I decided to seek out a higher power, and specifically targeting the Archbishop. So when I heard that he was going to be speaking down at the Roundhouse, and the issue was actually for downwinders, that was the issue. But I buttonholed him afterwards, and I actually practiced a pickup line. And I walked up to the Archbishop and I go, do you know that more money is spent in your archdiocese on nuclear weapons than any other diocese in the country? And he goes, oh. And that's like, I'm the spider to the fly. Jump in my web.
I took the bait.
Yeah, so it's just been fantastic ever since. The first concrete thing that happened under the Archbishop's leadership is he released this pastoral letter in January of 2022, and there's copies out there. His staff just beautifully laid it out, and it's quite a piece. And I like to boast about it, but it's been translated into Spanish, Italian, Korean, and Japanese. The Pope Francis, sent him a personal thank you letter over this pastoral letter. So it's been kind of reverberating around the Catholic world. And I want to make clear, I can't speak for the Archbishop or the Archdiocese. That should be obvious. I can speak on things we've talked about. Well, one of the things is to grow this momentum and specifically try to make it an interfaith effort, which has something to do with us being here at Mountain Cloud now. Looking forward a bit, I'm getting into events. I don't mean to steal your thunder. On July 16th, the Archdiocese and others are hosting a major event at the Catholic Center on the way to the community college, that's Santa Maria de la Paz. July 16th is the 78th anniversary of the Trinity test. And I went to the Trinity site for my first time just the day before yesterday. But, needless to say, world history changed at that spot in New Mexico 78 years ago. And then the other thing that's happening is we're going to Japan. I'm hoping that the Archbishop will elaborate on this, but we're going there for the Hiroshima and Nagasaki anniversaries, the bombing anniversaries, and meeting with those bishops. Again, I hope you elaborate on it. Now, I must not take too long. I'm trying to paint with a very broad brush, and I'll get right down to business here. We are in a second nuclear arms race, and in large part, it's being fueled by that laboratory that is roughly 20 miles away from us as the crow flies right now. The U.S. is investing $2 trillion into the complete makeover of its nuclear forces. And about 2/3 of that is Pentagon money for new missile subs and bombers. The other third is for the labs and the production plants. And most of you are going to know this is mostly about plutonium pit production. And I will submit to you, I believe that we as New Mexicans have a special responsibility to help this world work towards a future world free of nuclear weapons. And I'm only going to take like another minute, but just some fast facts. Know that the Department of Energy is going to spend more money in the coming fiscal year, more money in New Mexico, $10 billion, than our state has in its entire operating budget. Just to give you an idea of the scale of DOE funding in this state. And 75% of that $10 billion is for core nuclear weapons research and production programs. Another 5% is to dispose of the waste from that expanded plutonium pit production. It's essential that we get to our congressional delegation, as I like to put it, and the Archbishop, we talk frankly with each other. He's a babe in the woods when it comes to politics. That's my job, to try and translate this into political impact. But let's grow an interfaith movement, which includes no faith at all, but let's grow a movement here in Santa Fe so that we can work concretely towards a future world free of nuclear weapons. I'm closing now. Be aware there's some literature out there. I got a fresh fact sheet. It's entitled New Mexico, America's Nuclear Colony. It speaks for itself. I think it will shock you. There's also a fact sheet out there on the waste isolation pilot plant, the world's only permanent dump for radioactive waste. And it's going to primarily be for future waste from future nuclear weapons production. And then again, there's the Archbishop's pastoral letter. So please help yourself to that paper. Finally, I will just say, every now and then, Archbishop John turns to me and he looks at me and he says, the hand of God is working through us. And he and I have different ideas about God, but when he says that, it just sends a shiver up my backbone. And I want to invite you all, whatever your idea of God is, but I want to invite all of us together to work with God's grace towards a world free of nuclear weapons. We're either going to transcend and solve what is, in a way, a Zen koan. How are we going to solve this problem that has no logical solution? How are we going to do it? Well, the answer is up and over, transcend. We're going to do it somehow with God's grace. So please come with us. And with that, my dear friend,
thank you, Jay. Well,
Archbishop John C. Wester.
Thank you, Jay. You're just wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Q&A encouraged, okay, after he speaks, and he's got to go at 3:30.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much, Valerie, and thank you, Jay, and thank all of you. And I know there are people online. Ruben, thank you for your email, and I wish you all the best at the CTA there. And I am so pleased to be able to be here today. Let me just say that when Jay introduced me so kindly, that I am not the higher power he was referring to. I was simply a representative of the higher power. And so I want to make that clear. And I'm so grateful for our friendship. It is, I think that's part of God's providence as well, that we've become such good friends, and Karen, his wife, because we do come from different backgrounds. And as he said, when we first met each other, I thought right away that he was one of these radical protester types. And he looked at me later on and says, you were right, I am that way. But so I think this is a friendship that will probably bring both of us closer to our respective belief systems and probably ultimately end up with me being in jail for a while. But anyway, whatever happens, that's the hand of God too. And I have a very dear friend of, not a friend as per se, but Louis Vitale, who was a Franciscan in San Francisco, who's probably been in jail more times than anything, protesting Nevada test sites and such as that. So much so that the judge got to know him pretty well. And he let Louis, and this is unusual, but he let Louis even, kind of give a talk to the court and all that, Oh, Father, you're back. So he did. I have a funny story, but I it's really quick. His aunt was 100 years old. And every time he'd go to jail, he'd have a little lunch for us. We'd have a lunch for him because of his anti-nuclear armaments protests. And so he said, John, would you mind coming to the lunch? Because you're the auxiliary bishop, and she's 100 years old, and she thinks I'm a convict, so I have to, So the whole lunch, I'm sitting there going, your uncle is really a prophet. He's a criminal. No, he's not a criminal at all. He's standing up. He's prophetic. He's standing up for what's right. He's a criminal. And everything I tried, so Louis looked over, sorry, Louis, you're a criminal. It's not working. So, but anyway, he was a criminal for God, and he did great work. It's an honor to be with you today, and I have learned so much from Jay, and I'm really pleased to be with you here today. Just a very little bit. I had the pleasure and honor and privilege, really, for about 7 or 8 years, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops sponsored a dialogue in San Francisco Bay Area between, we called it the Zen Chan Catholic Dialogue. And so we met once a year for about 3 days, 4 days. We either meet at a Catholic site and the other year at a Buddhist site. So we met at the City of 10,000 Buddhas several times, and then at Mercy Center down in Burlingame, and then the Zen Center in San Francisco. So it was really an enlightening moment for all of us. And what we did was we took commonalities between the Catholic religion and Buddhism and Zen, and so for example, we spent one whole session on bowing. And then we spent another session on the Bodhisattva path and the spiritual path in both of our traditions. So I really enjoyed that very, very much. It was very enlightening for me, no pun intended. And it was really a wonderful opportunity. So today, getting at this, this theme of, it's a theme of peace. I think I would put that, and I'll say this a bit later, I think it's a pro-life issue. I think it's a peace issue. I think it's at the core of peace and at the core of pro-life because, intended or not, or whatever, because nuclear weapons are so powerful and so prevalent in our world today that they have, and this is not stretching the imagination one little bit, they have, and just a fraction of what we have in the world has enough power to destroy all of civilization throughout the world. So it's really an issue it's extremely urgent and important. We always study in these time management to differentiate what's important, what's urgent. This is urgent and important both at the same time. Sadly, I don't believe in our world today that the urgency is recognized. I think that certainly Ukraine war has done a lot, perversely, to raise the question of nuclear arms and their destructiveness and how dangerous they are. But nonetheless, there still is a whole lot of work to be done to convince people of the urgency of this matter. And so it's hard to know how to get at it. There is so much to talk about, and then our time is limited. So I thought last night, this came to me. I didn't even realize it until last night, to be honest with you, but on June 10th, 1963, John Kennedy gave what they call his speech talk. Today is the anniversary of that speech. And I was going to call you, but it was too late. And I said, Jay, I just realized, of course, you probably knew it all along, but I said, so what I'm going to do is try very briefly to take elements that I cull from his speech, this peace speech, and then relate it to some of what we're doing. And then maybe in the Q&A, we can flesh out other points that I missed or didn't give enough attention to. I think one of the premises that I operate on, and this gets back to the urgency question, is a dear friend of mine, my best friend my whole life until he passed away in 2012, Father Jay Coghlan. And he always said, he loved that quote, "We're as sick as our secrets." And now from a psychological point of view, that has great merit. That's certainly true. but it applies to the nuclear armament question, the nuclear disarmament question. Because I believe that our nuclear arms is a big secret. And I believe that our world is very sick because of it. Now, yes, people know we have nuclear weapons. What I mean by secret is nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody has the impetus to talk about it. And either because we're afraid or because we think we're so safe, we don't have to worry about it because we have our 5,500 weapons and we're all protected, whatever it may be, people don't talk about it. So in effect, I believe it's a secret. And frankly, the government, it's a secret. You just saw in the paper with, what's his name, anyway, I don't want to say his name out in this sacred space, but no offense if I don't get political, but there were nuclear secrets. Jay talks often about, accidents and things, happening by happenstance that we don't even intend. Here we have nuclear secrets that are being bandied about by an irresponsible person from what I read in the papers, allegedly. And, these are nuclear secrets, giving details of nuclear top secrets. So these secrets, this is not healthy for us. And our earth is sick, our world is sick, our civilizations are sick because of it. And it's also very much connected to climate. That's another area where there's dissension and controversy, but the care of our earth, the climate change, and all of the realities we're dealing with floods and fires and temperatures soaring up or going down. This is also connected to nuclear weapons because, obviously, if we ever did have an Armageddon, a nuclear Armageddon, then we'd have a nuclear winter. And you talk about climate change, it would be instantaneous. So we'd have 10 years at least of a nuclear winter. And I just got through reading The Road by Cormac McCarthy. In a way, I wish I hadn't because it gives me nightmares. But it was just a fictional account of what it would most likely be like. It was very realistic, frankly, based on his research on the matter. So anyway, with that introduction, and then one final thing I wanted to say is, I'm obviously a Catholic, and so I'm coming at it from my Catholic tradition. But as I said in the beginning, I believe there are a lot of similarities and parallels between our traditions about peace, about centering ourselves, about plumbing the depths of reality in order to achieve enlightenment, albeit in different traditional ways, but nonetheless, that is still something that we have in common. So I think that both of our traditions and all of our traditions, wherever we may be from, have this in common, to find peace with each other and to be able to plumb the depths of what it means to be a human and to be able to preserve that and to protect it for future generations. So I come at this from a moral point of view. I believe that this is a strongly moral question, an ethical question. And Pope Francis, of course, has absolutely, for us Catholics, he's changed the entire landscape. He moved the moral needle seismically. And so he said, even possessing nuclear weapons is immoral. That's a huge statement. So that means that all of these weapons that we have stored up, all the research, all the money, it's immoral. This is absolutely immoral. And he hasn't backed down on that. He's doubled down on it. He's repeated it, not only in Japan, but in other venues. And as Jay would tell you and taught me, the Vatican was the first to sign the TPNW. So so the treaty on the the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It was the first one to sign that. The Vatican was. And so, and Cardinal Parolin gave a very wonderful speech about a year ago. Cardinal Supich, Cardinal McElroy have given talks on this, Cardinal McElroy in South Korea. So there's a lot of weight, moral weight around this question. It's not like, let's pick a social justice issue and let's make it our priority for a year or two. No, this is something that has extreme moral and ethical weight for us, and I think for all of us, that we must really attend to, as difficult as that is. So 60 years ago today, JFK gave this speech, which really is I had never heard of it before. I do remember 62, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, when I was 12, but I'd never heard of this before. And it was just really, it was refreshing. Now, I have to admit, I'm biased, and I have boyhood memories of him, as a little boy when he was elected, and my parents and people talking about him. And so politics aside and all those other issues, aside that might be associated with him, I was just really taken by his leadership, a leadership that to me, in my view, is rather lacking in our societies today in different venues, different areas. So I think that the first point I would make then is simply that the JFK in his speech, I'm just going to try to make some parallels really quickly here between the pastoral letter that we put out with Jay and my staff, and then Father John Deere, and then and JFK's points. So the first one is that nuclear disarmament is an essential moral question for many of our traditions and faiths, for our world today. It's something we cannot ignore. And that's what we put out in our letter. And so the message, Ruben, that I would say from the beginning, so I don't forget it, is that we have to have a conversation, because conversations bring things to light. So, and this is the message of the Peace Pastoral. So the message that I would have for all of us and for me is that we engage this conversation with everybody we can, in every place that we can, in every venue that we can, to heighten an awareness of the situation, to free us from the sickness of nuclear weapons, and to get it out in the open where the light of, for us, the light of Christ, the light of God, the light of a higher being, can wash away the many lies and narratives that we've been given over the years that simply are not true, and help us to see really and clearly what we're dealing with and a way forward to rid ourselves of nuclear weapons. So that would be the message, have a conversation. And I would emphasize not a debate. Now, and this is not easy for me because I'm part Irish and part Swedish. So I've got the Irish pugnacity and I've got the Swedish, taking over the world thousands of years. Anyway, I get distracted too easily. So that's another thing. But so it's a conversation. And I welcome everybody. I welcome people from LANL, scientists, engineers. We have deacons, Catholic deacons in the Archdiocese who work at Los Alamos laboratories and at Sandia, either as engineers. We have a priest, Father Ty. He's one of our vocation directors. He is a nuclear scientist, and he worked at LANL, or I forget which, Sandia, one of the two, as a nuclear scientist. He's explained to me the difference between fusion and fission. I said, I'm doing this work. I need your help. What is all this? So he writes diagrams, and because he's got a PhD in nuclear science. So, and he's a priest. So I like to say that he saw the light and began to change. So anyway, that's my message, the key message. What are some of the themes? One theme in John Kennedy's speech, and he refers to it, he spends some time in the speech exposing the devastation, the potential devastation of nuclear weapons. And keep in mind, this is 1963, June 10th, this date in 1963. That was 60 years ago today. So imagine the potential lethalness of the weapons today. But when he said it then, as today, it's very terrifying, even more terrifying now. And so our letter brings this out as well, and also includes, I forget now if we brought this out, but artificial intelligence, hypersonic delivery systems, things that they've come up with now that are scary. You saw in the paper, just artificial intelligence in itself is scary. And the scientists equated it, at least in their opinion. They said, how potentially devastating is it? They equated it to a pandemic or a nuclear Armageddon. That's how dangerous AI is in itself. But imagine if we were to give artificial intelligence the nuclear codes and then depend on artificial intelligence to somehow make a determination that it's time to launch. It's very scary. So that's one point. So I'm not going to belabor that, and Jay can certainly give you insights galore about the power of them. I think the next point is leadership, and this gets to what I was saying earlier about the urgency of it, that all of us have to take a leadership role in this. To be honest with you, I would much prefer to maintain my friendship with Jay, but maybe pull back now. I say I've done what I can do. I've put out the pastoral letter. I have a lot to do. We're coming out of bankruptcy in the Archdiocese. We have a lot going on as we rebuild. My plate is more than full. But I don't think that I can do that in conscience. I think that I do believe it's divinely inspired. And I think that I have to find the time to do what I can, and I can't do everything, and I do say no to some requests and all, but I try. I think, and so I think all of us have to do that, each in his or her own way, and again, we have to do it, I think, well, but we have to take leadership. JFK took great leadership, and I'll just give you a little quote from his speech, which really impressed me. In the middle of a speech, he said, "To make clear our good faith and solemn convictions on this matter, I now declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere so long as other states do not do so. We will not be the first to resume. Such a declaration is no substitute for a formal binding treaty," very important, "but I hope it will help us achieve one. Nor would such a treaty be a substitute for disarmament, but I hope it will help us to achieve it." I really miss good oratory like he had, the ability to turn a phrase or to be clear and succinct. So our pastoral letter speaks of leadership as well, and that the United States has to take leadership. Jay has already indicated that the opposite is happening. Not only are we not taking leadership in this regard, but we're going in the opposite direction. And the fact is that we're in a new and far more dangerous arms race than we were the first time. And that what we're in now is appalling. And so I think that's another issue that we need to recognize, is that we have to take leadership, particularly, and I think Jay is 100% right, particularly as New Mexicans, as Santa Feans. For us, this is the Catholic Archdiocese of the Holy Faith of St. Francis of Assisi, who is a peacemaker and whose influence really extends well beyond the Catholic Church, who is a model, I think, kind of one of those holy figures, in society that helps us to see a common humanity and reaching out in peace. And so I think we have to be because we're the ones, it was here where this started. I think it's only fitting that it's here where we continue the efforts to bring peace to our world. And of course, one of the most urgent ways of doing that is nuclear disarmament. Another aspect of the JFK speech 60 years ago today at the American University was the whole notion of relationships. I was very impressed with the fact that Kennedy said, we have to stop demonizing each other. Does this sound familiar today to you? Calling people names, people in high levels of authority, talking like they're children I don't want to offend children on the playground. I don't think children on the playground would do that, or at least not as much, or at least not with such intentionality and vituperativeness. Kennedy said, and it was he said that in this regard, on relationships, let me see if I can find that. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. We can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture, and acts of courage. Our belief is that God created us to be relational. We believe in a Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. There's a relationship. And that we're made in God's image, therefore we're made to be relational. And so it's in our nature to be harmonious. It's in our nature. And you coming here to the Zen Center, you can pick that up immediately. You can see it in your eyes and in the meta communication, your body language, that there's a peacefulness here, that there's an openness to relationships, that a lot of the barriers we put up between ourselves have been dismissed here. And this is the kind of world that we're seeking. And I think in the terms of nuclear weapons, we have to get to that if we're going to have successful nuclear disarmament. We have to stop looking at each other objectively, but rather as persons. And so Russia is not the enemy. North Korea is not the enemy. China is not the enemy. Iran's not the enemy. Now, I'm not being naive. I know that there are individuals who sadly have taken a path of destruction and hatred, and that's too bad. We need to work and pray, and from our perspective, and try to, rectify that somehow or other. But my point is that we mustn't treat each other as, because I'm reading a good book called The Anatomy of Peace. It's about by the Arbinger Institute. And one of the premises is that When we objectify people, which I treat you as an object and not a person, then I go to war with you. And then, because I'm at war with you, I'm going to pull all my tricks out of my bag and I'm going to insult you, defame you, hurt you, do everything I can to destroy you. But then I've got to justify what I'm doing, so I have to demonize you even further, which in turn justifies more negative towards you, and it just goes on and on. Instead of saying that you're a person and that you're a good and that there's goodness in you. Well, I would like to raise this up and how we deal with other countries, to start talking with people, and to, especially, you know, the non-nuclear states have been trying to get the nuclear states to sign agreements and to talk with each other and to treat each other as persons and not as the enemy. So I think that that's part of what we have to do in this conversation, is to listen to people and to see them, and to learn from them, and to continue to speak the truth about nuclear disarmament. My firm belief is that if we speak the truth about nuclear disarmament, people will come around to that. I think, you know, in our tradition, we say the truth will set you free. And I believe that this is the truth, that humanity must rid ourselves of nuclear arms, and the truth will set us free from this terrible scourge. And so I think that's a very important part, as our relationships with one another are critical. Another element here, and this gets to, I think, for us, Pope Francis's Laudato Si, is the care of our common home, Mother Earth. That again, it's quite clear that nuclear weapons, as I mentioned in the beginning, can destroy everything we have, and so quickly and so immediately. So we have to see ourselves as being good stewards, not just in terms of what the destruction that nuclear weapons could make happen, but the money. Jay mentioned the money, and he, you know, this is he's just giving you the current figures. I mean, imagine the money that's been spent up to this point on nuclear weapons, you know, in the last since 1945.
It's roughly $8 trillion.
$8 trillion. Isn't that amazing? $8 trillion. I can't even in my mind imagine $1 trillion. It would be, you can make metaphors and stack $100 bills, but that's the only way to get at it. It's just $8 trillion. Imagine what that money could have done for the poor, to educate people in developing countries for whom water means death. They drink water, they get disease, and they die. You know, eradicating disease, curing cancer. Here in New Mexico, you know, poverty is a huge issue. Violent crime is an issue. Addiction is an issue. And so imagine what that money could do to help people and to really bring a fullness of life. We have, one of our saints said that, you know, the joy of God is a human being fully alive. We can't be fully alive in this planet as long as we have nuclear weapons, because we're living under the shadow. And that shadow continually, you know, pushes us down. So I think we have to see ourselves as being stewards to combat all of this terrible waste of money. You know, the pit cores now that they're working on at Lanol, number one, they're not necessary. And I got it's always tough to talk with him here because he knows all the facts. But I think you'd agree that we don't have to work on the pit. They're good. They're perfectly good for at least 40 years, maybe longer.
100.
100 years. Imagine that.
On average, they're 40 years old now.
40 years old now. They're good for another 60. So we don't have to be spending the money on them. And secondly, these have been tested. So the new pit cores they're working on have not been tested. So that means we have to start testing again. And that, I think have we already broken that treaty or?
No.
Not yet.
That's a whole nother.
That's another, yeah.
A long thing.
So but there you see that what we're doing is so risky and it's so ill-advised from so many points of view. And yet we're pouring all this money into it because we have this, to me, it's almost like an obsession, you know, these nuclear states to have the biggest and the most and just keep building it when we know that this is not the answer. And so I think stewardship would, and for our common home would, and Kennedy talks about, by the way, it's kind of a precursor to a lot of our climate control issues and the green movement and taking care of our environment. You know, he says that the earth is our common link. This is what links us together. We all live on the same small planet. We breathe the same air. We cherish our children's futures, and we're all mortal. And Kennedy was saying this in '63 on this date. So I think that in our pastoral letter brings us out, we quote liberally from Pope Francis and other secular and religious leaders about the importance of taking care of our common home. So I think that these are all very compelling issues that we can get around: stewardship, relationships, bringing out the good in people, and really trying to, all of these are common themes that I think are quite compelling. Now, I found in my own limited time doing this, I have found that people kind of have, they've accepted the narratives that we've been told. There's a book that Jay had me read, which I found Dan Ellsberg's book, on the doomsday machine. And I have to admit to you, and I say this freely, my friends will tell you I tend to be naive. That's the tendency, but it's okay. I'm happy on my happy place, so I don't mind being naive. But I am an optimist too, and so I kind of tend to believe if the government says this is the way it is, then I pretty much, for quite a while, I used to think, well, that must be the way it is. Thanks to Jay Coghlan, I no longer believe that. So I can see now that you have to probe that and test that, and how politics gets involved, and how trying to get a vote gets involved. So one of the things I see, and I feel this strongly when I talk to people, is that they look at me and they say, well, you're really naive, John. You're just being naive. This is the real world. And the real world has nuclear weapons. And Russia has over 6,000, whatever. We have 5,000, whatever. All these other states. So just accept it. This is the real world. Don't be naive. But Jay has a good response to that, one that I like very much. And basically what he's saying is, he quotes McNamara, the Secretary of Defense under Kennedy, as saying that the only reason we survived the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis was luck. And basically, luck is not a winning strategy. We all have different pastimes. One of my pastimes, I had a group of my friends, we played poker on Friday night. My brother and I have some priests and their brothers, and we would play cards. And I always did poorly in poker. I don't have a good poker face. I'd get a good hand. Whose bet is it? Whose bet is it? They'd all drop, and I'd have my royal flush, and I didn't get any. But so anyway, I think we have to look at that issue, of luck. I really believe that. I believe also, if I may say, I know I can't prove it. I do believe, from my tradition, that God's providence is also at work here, and that somehow or other, although I can't explain it, as Shakespeare said, there's a providence that shapes our ends, rough hew them as we may. Our nuclear weapons have really rough hewn our ends. But I do believe there's a providence somehow that's at work in all of this to help us get rid of them and have kept us safe thus far. But I don't know how much we can press our luck. I think that, to me, Murphy's Law obtains here, and it just, human beings with accidents and all, we have to look at who's really being naive. I think what I've learned from Jay is that it's far more naive to believe that we can live with nuclear weapons than to believe that we're better off without them. That the real naivete is thinking that nuclear weapons are the answer. And yet, Heinrich and other of our own New Mexico representatives keep voting to pour more and more money down that rat hole and to keep paying for nuclear weapons. They're part of that whole, military industrial complex that feels that we have to, and Eisenhower himself, talked about that. I have that quote here, I won't look for it now, but there's a quote here I have from Eisenhower who talked about that, that building these weapons and all of these iron, metal bullets and guns is robbing from our civilization, robbing from our children, robbing from our cultures. And that was Eisenhower, 5-star general. So I think that, If in this conversation, people say, well, we're naive, then again, it's a conversation, so I'm not going to attack them for it, but we need to listen and perhaps gently explain why I believe no. I think you're being far more naive, and here's why. So that's where I think the conversation could be helpful. I think that all of this has to be grounded in hope, the virtue of hope. Hope is something that it's not a fantasy. I think nuclear disarmament is a well-founded belief and principle. I think it's possible. We've done it in the past. We've gone from roughly 80,000 down to about the 13,000+ weapons we have now in the world. So we have seen it can work with proper leadership, with proper incentives and motivation. So I think that hope has to be something that we cling to and that we live and that we really believe, that, really espouse the hope. And JFK mentioned that. He talked about hope. He said, I also believe that we must re-examine our own attitudes as individuals and as a nation. For our attitude is as essential as the USSR's in those days. And every graduate of this school, American University, every thoughtful citizen who despairs of war and wishes to bring peace should begin by looking inward, by examining his or her own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union, towards the course of the Cold War, and towards freedom and peace here at home. So to examine our attitudes, not to have a defeatist belief, he said. This leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that humankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. That is such a telling quote to me, that we're not gripped by those. We have, we are the people of hope, and that we have to keep this conversation going so that we can bring forth true nuclear disarmament going forward. Now, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, I think that was 1970 or so.
No, that's the non-proliferation.
Not prolifered yet. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT.
NPT.
That was the 70s?
Went into effect 1970.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that one is, so what happened that we just don't sign that? What happened?
The key thing about the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it was essentially a bargain between the weapon states and non-weapon states. Non-weapon states promised to never acquire nuclear weapons. The original, what's called P5, the original 5 nuclear weapons powers, promised to enter into serious negotiations at an early date leading to nuclear disarmament. They've never done that. Never done it.
So that's just going by the wayside, really, then. It's not in effect, I guess. Or
well, it led to the non-weapon states formulating the ban treaty, which the Vatican was the first to sign and ratify.
And that's the more recent one, which is just like
2 years old.
2 years old now. So I think that to me is a concrete step, that if we in our conversation could ask our leaders to go back to negotiating, to these treaties, to taking seriously these treaties, to somehow channeling their political ancestors and that motivation and that leadership that put us on the course, for a while anyway, toward nuclear disarmament. If we could channel that again and have our leaders work toward that, then I think that would be certainly a good thing to do. So that's one of the, again, as a conversation, you can't start with saying, well, we're not talking unilateral disarmament, obviously, and with the geopolitical environment today, it's a rather thorny issue. But there's something that we can start to really set our sights on. Can we get you, Senator, Congressperson, can we get you at least to start talking again about treaties and start living up to the treaties we've made and to start looking at this as something that we have to do? And if not, why not? Why wouldn't you? What's the harm in coming together and promoting those kinds of peace talk? Kennedy did it, Khrushchev did it. Khrushchev passed out this peace talk, Kennedy so-called peace talk. He got copies and passed it out to his key leadership. He thought it was such an important kind of a speech. And so I think, to me, that these things are possible. So that to me, that's a challenge that I hope to give to our political leaders when I get the time. But I think that's an important thing to do. So let me just wrap up real quickly. One of the, Jay mentioned the July 16th interfaith commemoration, which we're going to have on July 16th. So that I really encourage you, if you have the, if you're able to attend that. I think it's going to be very profitable. It'll be many faiths and traditions will be represented, and it will be a time to come together to mark this really the moment the humanity crossed the nuclear line. This is a very significant moment right here in New Mexico. And so, and again, I think the prayer and certainly, you know, meditation and focusing ourselves on these issues is very, very important. And then we're going to take this trip to Japan on July 31st. One of the things I'd like to do is to engage the Archbishop of Nagasaki, the Catholic Archbishop, and the Bishop of Hiroshima in a conversation that might lead toward us becoming sister dioceses. And then Bishop Etchen, Paul Etchen, from the Archbishop of Seattle, he has 8 Trident submarines in his archdiocese, any one of which has enough firepower to destroy civilization and the world. So he's going to come along with 2 of his advisors, Jay and Karen and I, Leslie, our communication director, and Ann Avalon, our peace and justice coordinator for the archdiocese. We're going to travel to Japan. And now Peter Metz wants to come, but I got to tell him we have to. But anyway, so the purpose will mainly be to, first of all, to be there with our Japanese brothers and sisters to commemorate these 2 horrific anniversaries as a sign of solidarity and support. So we're there as their guests, really, just to support them and what they're doing. We're not there to tell them anything or to anything like that, but just to listen to them and to support them. Secondly, we'd like to engage them in seeing how we can, you know, we're already connected, whether we like it or not, through the bomb. And now we'd like to be connected in a more intentional way as dioceses working toward peace, principally by nuclear disarmament. And we've already gotten indications that they're very eager to engage those conversations. And I think it's going to look very positive. So that's basically one of the outcomes of the trip that we would like to see established. And then I intend to go back, and perhaps others will too, in 2025 for the 80th anniversary of the commemorating the dropping of those bombs. And that basically is what got me thinking about this in the first place. I took a trip to Japan in 2017 with the 2 bishop friends of mine. And when we went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we saw the memorials and the museums and the images. And the one that really struck me was the children. You know, the children were running to the window because when the bomb detonated so many feet above the ground, there was a bright light. And of course, in our tradition, the light of Christ is what brings peace and harmony and new life. And that light, you know, brought death. And so, and I thought of myself, you know, going home in 1962. And I remembered vividly, I can still remember where I stood on Glenwood Avenue. Isn't that amazing? That was 60 years ago, 61 years ago. And I remember right where I was standing because a plane went overhead and my friends and I forget their name, probably Tom Lavazzoli or Steve Green, and we're walking home from school. And I said, oh boy, I hope that's not a Russian plane. They're going to drop a bomb on us. Because right across the street from where I live was the Nike missile site. And we were aware of that. You know, even as kids, you pick things up, you know. And even though our parents tried to shield us from it, we picked things up. And so I remember the fear I felt, but I went home to a loving and safe home. Those children never got the opportunity to go home. And if they did, you know, there was no home to go home to. So this, I think, is a big motivation for me, is kind of the incentive, if you will, the initial incentive to be involved in this. I'd like to just close with what I think is, and I found this on your website, Jay's website, Nuclear Watch New Mexico. It's a quote from Omar Bradley, General Omar Bradley. I think he was a 5-star general too, if I'm not, maybe 4. I think he was a 5-star. And he said this: ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We know more about war than we know about peace, more about killing than we know about living. We have grasped the mystery of the atom and rejected the Sermon on the Mount. I thought that was a very telling quote from a United States general. So I leave you with that, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to engage a conversation or discussion as you wish, or with Jay at my side.
And Valerie.
And Valerie, yes, yes, indeed.
Well, thank you, Archbishop.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. Inspiring,
Welcome, Valerie.
galvanizing, horrifying, and pointing us toward our common humanity, and really speaking to the heart of what's going on in this place and across communities. And I'm grateful, really, so grateful. I know this matters. Mm-hmm. Just what's happening in this room and in this cloud. So we would like to begin with a raised hand from Ruben Habito. Ruben, are you able to unmute?
Yes, I believe so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Archbishop Wester. Your very being, your presence, and your being who you are is such a precious gift to all of us. And first of all, I'd like to thank you on behalf of all practitioners of Zen, especially at Mountain Cloud, for giving us that message. And that reminds us that our Zen practice of cultivating stillness in our lives, is not an escape from the world, but precisely a way of entering into the heart of the world where we meet the world's pain. And in doing so, we are inspired to go back to the world and bring the gift of peace that we receive from our spiritual practice. And your example is really a very, very shining one for all of us, that as a spiritual person, as a person of faith, you come out of that faith and not just make it something for those who are going to be saved, but precisely make it a basis for inviting others to attend to the world's woundedness. And so thank you so much. I also would like to, as I said to you in the email, I'm here at a conference of Catholic theologians, and I will relay your message and see what I can do to invite my Catholic colleagues. There are about 400 of us from different institutions throughout the United States, North America, and some from Europe, to consider what we may be able to do, either a statement or some ways of inviting our members to participate in this move toward peace by really questioning this nuclear arsenal, questioning our current arms race, and so on, as part of our theological task. And I have so much more to say, but I just wanted to express words of gratitude, and I look forward to being in communication with you and with Jay on ongoing issues related to this. I also wanted to note that you mentioned Daniel Ellsberg. His son, Robert Ellsberg, is the editor of Orbis Books, who is here in our conference. I was talking with him this morning, and he said that his father now is in the hospice and he could go anytime the next few days. So I would like to ask for your prayers and the prayers of all who are listening to hold Daniel Ellsberg in our hearts as we really look at his life with gratitude. He really stood up for peace. He stood up for what needed to be done at that point, at the expense of his own reputation, at the expense of his own career and life. And so that is the kind of person that we would all like to be. So thank you so much. I cannot exhaust the words to just say, I cannot say enough words to say my gratitude, and I look forward to continuing to be inspired by you and in following the example. And I wish more bishops would hear the word also and be a prophet like you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruben. I thank you very, very much, and I appreciate that so much. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you, and please pass on my regards to Robert. I met him at Pax Christi last August, and he's a wonderful person, and please do give him my very best. Thank you so much.
Excellent. I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you ask him to spread the word on the pastoral letter?
Oh, yeah, and then Jay mentioned too, Ruben, if you could just mention the pastoral letter, and we'd be happy to, they can get copies from our website in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe.
Yes.
Information in there for them, if that would be helpful. So
excellent. That will be really very timely. Is it already out, or is it still
yes,
to come?
It's already out. If you just go on to Archdiocese of Santa Fe,
Excellent.
asfnm.org, and then it's got a link, and
Yes.
you can download it on your own computer and have it right there.
Thank you so much. I will do that. Thank you.
Ruben.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ruben. It's a joy to see you here and hear your voice and receive your message. Thank you. Anne, are you able to unmute?
Yes, I am from Kansas City, and we have a major nuclear weapons plant here. It makes 80% or more of the nuclear weapons parts. And we have had Memorial Day protests at that plant for the last about a decade or so. And I was arrested there for trespassing this past Monday. And I have reached out to the bishop and to my parish priest and other priests that I know, but I'm not getting much of any support. And what would you recommend as a way to engage them?
Well, that's a good question, because there are many opinions and points of view on this question, of course. And I think for me, the first point, the way to engage is to reach a consensus on the importance of living in peace. And secondly, that nuclear weapons are a major obstacle to that peace. And my belief is, and what I have found so far, is that people do agree with that. It's how we get there that's the difficulty. But if you can at least get that, and then say, to impress the importance of the gospel of peace, and that this is a Catholic social justice issue. I would mention, Anne, I'd mention Pope Francis's quote, that possessing nuclear weapons is immoral. Now, unfortunately, you're going to find some priests and even bishops who are not big fans of Pope Francis, but it's a big church, and we have a big tent, and they're not as enlightened as we are. He said demurely. But but I think if you at least start with those basics, peace, the reality of nuclear weapons, and just engage the conversation. I wouldn't expect right away, someone to join you on the front lines there as you are, and I admire you for your courage. But at least to get them to start talking about it, and then it's a process. Just keep doing it. And I brought it up here, and to be honest, I've gotten a lot more support outside the Archdiocese than within it. And for some obvious reasons, a lot of people get their livelihood from the labs. But I think that if you just try to take it a step at a time, start with those areas that we know we can get consensus on, and then keep building on that. And I think that would be a way to do it, and not to start too far down the line. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
There's a question in the room.
My name is Roberto Roybal.
Just one second.
My name is Roberto Roybal. This is a really nice group of people here, and nuclear disarmament is such a critical issue in our times. I can't help notice, but I'm one of the youngest people here. How do we engage young people? And just a shameless plug, every Friday we meet at the corner of Alameda and Guadalupe, across from Guadalupe Church. We have a protest, an anti-nuke protest. We have about 15 people come in every Friday. It's every Friday from 12 to 1. I'm one of the youngest people. I am the youngest person there. How do we engage our youth? I think that's a real critical issue, that we bring in more people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Frankly, I think you hit upon a very important question and topic. As I mentioned, I've got a visceral experience when I was 12 years old of nuclear weapon. The young people today, millennials, they don't have that, from what I can gather. They just don't talk about it. It doesn't seem to be an issue. So again, I think we just have to, but they do have young people today, in my own experience with our youth groups and talking about confirmations and all, young people have a very strong sense of fairness. They have a strong sense of fairness. So with young people, for me, what I would do is I would start with the inequality that weapons brings about in our world. That it's the rich countries, it's the prosperous countries mainly that have the weapons. and that the money spent on them is robbing the poor, robbing people who need help, robbing our own people, medical, whatever. I think I would start there on that issue, because that's how they would really, I think, engage, and then move to the terrible destructiveness of the weapons and how it's really, not safe for us to have them, et cetera. I think they would understand that too. But I think, keying on that idea of justice, of equity, of peace, those are things that I think in our own church we find, a lot of the young people are very, especially like, for example, the LGBTQ community, they're very much accepting, which is a good thing, to accept everybody, not to judge them, but to accept them as human beings. And so that's really important to them. And so I would key on that too, that the weapons are a real substantial threat to human life, to human beings, to our relationships. And then also in terms of the fairness, I think they would, what are we going to leave our children? What kind of a world are we leaving our children? Are we going to have even more nuclear weapons now, the way it's going? Is that what we want? And so I think those are kind of, what would you say, hooks maybe to get them to talk about the issues, and then eventually to talk about, all of those. But you're quite right. I don't know, Jay, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I do.
Oh, can you pass the mic?
Yeah, here, let me pass the
Oh, no. Thank you.
Yeah, of course I'm going to have some thoughts. And it starts with, I'm in a weird business. And in this weird business, bad news is good news in terms of arousing public consciousness. Sadly, we're bound to have more bad news. Arms control is virtually dead. There's only one last bilateral treaty between Russia and the US. It expires in about 18 months. As things stand now, the odds of replacing that treaty are pretty much nil. What's going to happen afterwards, China is doubling its arsenal as we speak. Russia and the US are currently limited to 1550 strategic warheads, but that's going to end with the demise of the treaty I was talking about. To get to the point, we're going to build up our arsenals numerically. We're already building it up qualitatively. We're going to start doing it numerically. A key change, and this was formally declared as national defense policy about 9 months ago. The US believes it now has two, what it calls near peer nuclear adversaries. And whereas it just used to be Russia, now it's also China. And we're probably going to match them 1-to-1 in weapons. So we could be looking at the US doubling its own stockpile soon, in a couple of years. This just gets me back to my point. There's going to be more bad news, and I believe that it's going to bring young people in, that it simply can't be ignored. So I believe it will happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is naive and I'm off the boat here. Thank you for your talk. You're remarkable. And I like what I think Ruben said, may all the archbishops be like you. And Jay, thank you. And Mountain Cloud for supporting it. Is nuclear energy a problem in that there's nuclear medicine? Nuclear energy runs all kinds of other things. Does that interfere with disarmament? Is that a stupid question?
No, it's a very good question. I'll give it to Jay. I don't think it does. I think they're two distinct things, but it's a good question.
The nuclear energy in the United States is commercial and weapons is military. That's not true in the USSR and now Russia. It was more blended together. And I've been in Russia a couple of times, and you have these massive plutonium production plants over there that at the same time they're piping heat to the adjacent towns to keep them warm. So, I mean, it's actually physically blended. But kind of the danger is that commercial use can be a cover of weapons programs. That was definitely the case with India. And India had so-called peaceful tests when in reality they were weapons tests. Now, as to the merits of nuclear energy, I'm not an activist on that. So I'm giving you my opinion, but the waste problem after 70 years has never been solved. And then what I'd like to say on the front end, on the economics, let's have a little free market capitalism. And the commercial nuclear energy program will not stand on its own feet. You do not have Wall Street investing in it. It would die overnight if it wasn't taxpayer subsidized. And then finally, every dollar that goes into nukes is a dollar robbed from renewables that, frankly, I'm stunned. I'm very pleasantly surprised. I never expected renewables to come online so quickly. And the cost of energy generated by renewables is now starting to go below natural gas. This is just, astounding. So again, I don't work on the nuclear energy issues, but I believe it to be one huge con game by those who have self-interest in it. And it should simply go away. And we can have a carbon-free future with renewables. I wouldn't have said that a year ago. So,
Good question.
Valerie, I think there's a couple of questions also in the chat if you.
Okay. Did you have a question, Peck?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a quick message. Jay, you were saying that the treaty between the US and Russia expires in about 18 months.
Yeah.
Is what you're seeing us sort of building up in anticipation of that treaty disappearing so that we're ready to explode with more weapons when that treaty expires? Is that what's happening?
yeah. And I'll be specific about that. You guys gotta keep me from getting too wonky because I go there. The type of plutonium pits that Los Alamos will start producing it's modeled on the W-87 warhead, which is a intercontinental ballistic warhead. However, they're modifying the design to an unknown degree. The reason why this is a big deal is because plutonium pits cannot be tested because of the existing global testing moratorium. Or alternatively, it could prompt the US back into testing, after which all hell would break loose from a proliferation perspective. But the purpose of these new W-87 warheads, the existing warheads on the existing intercontinental ballistic missiles, they're only one warhead per missile. This W-87 warhead can be MIRVed, which means multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles. It means you can put on more than one warhead per missile. And that's highly destabilizing on land-based ICBMs. Our sub-launch missiles are already MIRVed, meaning multiple missiles. But in short, this W-87, this new W-87 warhead, which will be the first pits produced at Los Alamos. This is something that's not being advertised by the government, but afterwards, after New START expires, after that numerical limit is gone, and for the sake of emphasis, this will be the first time that the world is without any arms control treaties whatsoever since the middle 1970s. It's that bad. We will have no arms control. And the US and Russia can go back to Merving. And then China is now in the picture, et cetera. So it's not pretty. I'll just stop by pointing out that no future plutonium pit production is to maintain the safety and reliability of the existing stockpile. It is all for future speculative new designs. And that's what this country is going to spend. I calculate 60 billion on just pit production, not the new warheads, just on pit production over the next 25 years.
We do have a few comments and questions in the chat, so I'll just note them. Anne from Kansas City said she will be attending a Catholic 24-hour prayer vigil at the Trinity site, July 15 through 16, which has been held for many years. Might the Archbishop be interested in attending?
Yes, I'd be interested, but we're going to be doing our,
right.
yeah, and I'm going until the 15th. I come back the 15th, but I'd like to go to the Trinity. Thank you, Ann. And I'll make it, I could put on my calendar for next summer, the 79th anniversary. And this year I'll be at the, and if you're, I don't know how long yours will go, but if you can, come up to Santa Fe and join us for our interfaith ceremony if you're free. And introduce yourself, please. I'd love to meet you there if you're able to go. But thank you for that, and certainly we'll try to get, I'd like to go just because I'm in this now. It's kind of way of, I think for me, it would be kind of way of praying over it and just kind of meditating on that site for a little bit about what happened there, you know, so.
But I know Ann, and she wants you to go to Kansas City.
Oh, well.
So let's go.
I just, yeah, we just had a priest from Kansas City. Yeah, that's, yeah.
Another question. This is from Min. Last month in Hiroshima, G7 countries issued the Hiroshima Vision, in which they called for nuclear deterrence instead of supporting TPNW. I think this means they reaffirmed their intention to maintain nuclear weapons. Do you have any comments about the Hiroshima Vision?
You know, I'd like to ask Jay to speak to that because he's brilliant on, well, many things, but on this whole idea of deterrence, because he can give us some factual points about true deterrence and what we definitely do not have, and how that argument of deterrence is really, what would you call it, a red herring. It's really not true. But
Yeah.
Well, if I'm so brilliant, how come I do stupid things sometimes?
Well, Karen and I will get
There's
back to
that.
you on that.
Yeah. The G7 summit was last month at the behest of the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. It was held in Hiroshima, which is where he's from. And he clearly was doing strong messaging by having it at Hiroshima. He lost relatives in the atomic bombing. He lost a lot of family, you know, that a generation before him. I have the impression that he personally wants the abolition of nuclear weapons, but he has a very taut tightrope to walk. Clearly, well, he has the threats of China and North Korea. So, and Japan is under the extended nuclear deterrence of the US. So again, politically, he has a hard time. The statement on the nuclear state of affairs by the G7 leaders was very disappointing. It was kind of rehashing the status quo, and it blamed Russia, it blamed Iran, it blamed North Korea, but it had zero critical self-analysis about how the weapons powers have failed to live up to the obligation under the Non-Proliferation Treaty made 52 years ago to enter into negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament. You all should know that Archbishop John Wester, Paul Etienne of Seattle, the Bishop of Hiroshima, and the Archbishop of Nagasaki did write a statement, quite a good statement, even a brilliant statement.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. I wrote it.
You wrote it.
But you know, it was a very good statement, and as far as I know, and as far as you know, that's the first time that bishops, Catholic bishops on an international level, have made a statement. Now, clearly, Archbishop, where we failed was in getting it properly publicized, because you all don't know about it, and we'll try to take care of that in the future. But do know that the four archbishops did make a statement, and quite a bit different from the official one that came out of the G7 leaders. And in part, our pending trip is, I would characterize it, meant, you know, to follow up on the failure of the G7 leaders. And again, attempt to have both religious and spiritual, but also political impact on into the future. The Archbishop mentioned it, the possibility of formal sister diocese relationships. And, you know, with my own on-scientific polling, the public finds that compelling. People get that. Yeah, get that. So hopefully that will have actual political impact in the long run. So I think I've said enough on that particular.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Couple of things here still. The Pope says possessing nukes is immoral. Does it not follow that a Catholic should not seek employment or keep employment in the nuclear weapons complex? One of the Eightfold Path is right livelihood, a step on this Buddhist Eightfold Path, right livelihood. Can a Buddhist earn their livelihood in the military arms that manage our nuclear arsenal? We've been talking about this, Jay and I, recently, because of all of the jobs that are needed in this area and that will come with the development that's planned. And people need work, and yet right livelihood. So this would be a real challenge for someone who's trying to walk that Eightfold Path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and we grapple with this. And I just did this morning. I ordained 18 deacons, and last year I ordained another 18. And I interview each of them, the couples of husbands and wives, and I asked that question of them, the ones I know that are in the lab, that, you know, what is your position on that? How do you feel about that? What's your moral position? The answer I usually get is that, let me say, it's a complicated question. So I know of people who have left employment in the labs precisely because they no longer in conscience could work there. And I would myself agree with that and applaud that personally. However, I could see morally somebody working there still with the proviso that, you know, they're really working hard for nuclear disarmament, but they realize we can't have unilateral disarmament, but that we got ourselves in a mess. We have to get out of it, but, you know, it's the way you get out of it that's critical. How would I compare it? It's like, you know, if you're out on the ice of a lake and you realize that was a dumb thing to do, you're a mile out in the ice and you're going to fall through. I need to go back. You just can't magically go back. You got to turn around and walk back. So you're still on the ice for a while. So I think morally, and that's, you know, we would believe in conscience. Conscience is supreme. So if you have a well-formed conscience and you can see yourself as contributing to peace by actually doing this for now, then for that person, you could see it as an ethical choice. I think other people would come to a completely different conclusion, and they would have to leave. So I don't think it's one of those issues where you could say just out of hand, that it's unethical for you to keep doing it. I don't think as Archbishop, I could say, might be interesting, Jay, to think about it. I don't think I could say that any Catholic working in the labs is now excommunicated from the Catholic Church. That would be, it would make the papers, I assure you. And so I don't think I could do that because conscience is supreme and because it's such a thorny, complicated issue. I like the fact that people are worried about it. I like the fact that they're struggling with the issue. I think it's better that they're morally grappling with it. Is this right or not? Rather than I'm all gung-ho, let's build the biggest weapons we can, or B, well, I don't care, it's just a living and who cares who gets killed. So in a sense, if you're struggling with it, I think that's a good thing. And to give apodictically and say black and white, this is either right or wrong, I could see different paths being taken.
I really appreciate that
Well,
nuance.
Robert Reed here. I've had my hand raised quite a while
Okay,
with a question.
go ahead, Robert.
Yes, I'm a retired doctor in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and belong to the Rotarians for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. And one of the messages to us today is to talk to as many people as we can about the elimination of nuclear weapons. And I've thought, what would be a best elevator talk to someone in a brief period of time, in less than 5 minutes, about it? And I, first of all, raising the question about eliminating nuclear weapons, a first response I get to many of my contemporaries is, oh, well, we could never do that. But the first part of the elevator talk, if need be, is to the fact that they can simply at any time, including any time soon and by accident, eliminate mankind, including all of us. But so convinced of that, we need to eliminate them. And here's the significant contribution I want to make, is that to visualize how it could happen. In other words, it would be to prevail upon the 9 nuclear weapons producing countries to negotiate a process whereby they will do 2 things. One, openly and simultaneously, all together, and under strict international surveillance, destroy their nuclear weapons and the facilities used to make them. And those facilities used to make them are a huge industrial complex, of course, in the United States. But in any event, but they'd be doing it simultaneously and openly and under surveillance. They would destroy the nuclear weapons and the facilities to make them. And they would prevent future recurrence of the nuclear weapons by leaving in place a permanent internationally composed verification system, which already greatly exists in the form of the International Atomic Agency's what do they call them? Agreements. Safeguard convenience. That's the agreements that came out of the Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty of 1970. In the 1980s, these safeguards were developed. In the 1990s, they were increased. They are in all of the countries in the world that use nuclear energy to produce nuclear energy to keep them from producing nuclear weapons. And those are already there in place, and they could continue to keep nuclear weapons from coming back once they occur. But just getting back before I finish to the visualization of the process by which nuclear weapons can be eliminated, and it could be within a 5 to 10 year process if simply by those 9 countries getting together, having a treaty to openly and simultaneously, probably Russians and Americans first, reduce their 6,500 each down to about 1,000, and then all 9 countries do it. Part of the process is each of those 9 countries would need some guarantees of replacement of the protection nuclear weapon they believe nuclear weapons possession gives them, in the form of and an argument to the American Senate Republicans, the chief people in opposition. The argument to them is, without any nuclear weapons in the world, the United States military currently is by far the most powerful, but it is deterred by nuclear weapons in other countries by doing things. So if there are no nuclear weapons anywhere in the world, the US military would be relatively much stronger, could do whatever more it wants around the world, much more now than be more powerful than now, and they'd be safer than now, and the whole world would be safer. And then regarding the general peace movements, the general peace movement of eliminating war generally is a long-term process, but we have to cut across an immediate process of eliminating those nuclear weapons. So ongoing wars will not they can give great destruction locally, but will not be able to eliminate humanity. That's why eliminating nuclear weapons is so important. And that's the process to visualize so that it can be done.
Thank you very much. That's the visualization is very important. Thank you for that.
So thanks everyone. I want to assure you that I will be copying the chat, and I'll just email it to you.
Oh,
because there were a few comments in there that we didn't have time for, and so. And once again, I know that the Archbishop is actually celebrating Mass in about 33 minutes, so we're going to let him go with heartfelt thanks for.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Thank you. I'm very grateful to you, and I'm grateful for your welcome and your hospitality. I appreciate your openness to this. I thank Jay, my dear friend, for all he's helped me to grow as a person and in this issue. So I'm very grateful to all of you, and let's keep the conversation moving. So please God, yeah. Thanks.